For decades, the world whispered it, speculated about it, debated it in documentaries, headlines, and late-night conversations. But no one inside the royal inner circle ever said it out loud. Until now. In a moment that stunned both the palace and the public, Princess Diana's son finally confirmed what millions had long suspected. And when he spoke those words, the silence that followed felt louder than any scandal before it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The statement did not come wrapped in theatrics. It was measured, controlled, almost restrained. And yet the emotional weight behind it was unmistakable. Years of speculation, of carefully worded interviews and deflected questions, seemed to collapse into a single admission that felt both inevitable and explosive. The setting was dignified, but the atmosphere was electric. Those listening sensed immediately that something irreversible had just occurred. A boundary long respected, perhaps feared, had finally been crossed. For the monarchy, the implications were historic. This was not gossip circulating in tabloids. It was not a commentator's theory or an outsider's accusation. It was confirmation from within, from Diana's own bloodline. That distinction changed everything. Because when truth emerges from the heart of the institution, it cannot be dismissed as hostility. It must be confronted. And confronting it meant reopening chapters the palace had long considered closed. What made the moment even more seismic was the subtle shift in tone that preceded the confirmation. There had been hints in recent years, small pauses, carefully chosen phrases, an undercurrent of frustration beneath polished responses. But this time, the restraint carried something different. Not anger. Not recklessness. Resolve. The kind of resolve that comes when silence becomes heavier than consequence. In that shift, seasoned observers sensed finality. This was not a passing remark. It was a line drawn in history. The global reaction was immediate and relentless. Newsrooms pivoted within minutes. Headlines recalibrated. Royal correspondents who had spent careers analyzing nuance suddenly found themselves scrambling to interpret blunt reality. Social media erupted in waves of disbelief, validation, and fierce loyalty. For some, this was vindication after years of doubt. For others, it felt like betrayal of an unspoken pact to protect the institution at all costs. Inside royal circles, phones rang incessantly. Emergency consultations were convened. Because once a truth is spoken publicly, it cannot be retrieved. Yet beyond the headlines and institutional anxiety, there was something profoundly human in the way Diana's son delivered his confirmation. His posture remained steady, his expression controlled. But beneath that composure was visible strain. This was not triumph. It was release. The emotional restraint suggested years of internal conflict, years of balancing loyalty to family with loyalty to memory. When he finished speaking, the quiet that followed carried more gravity than any dramatic outburst ever could. For decades, denial and deflection had been the palace's shield. Statements were crafted with surgical precision. Narratives were managed. Controversies redirected. The strategy was survival through silence. But silence has limits. And in this moment, that strategy fractured. The confirmation did not simply address one lingering suspicion, it signaled that the era of automatic suppression might be ending. Most striking of all was how Diana's legacy seemed to shift instantly. No longer confined to tragedy or myth, her story felt newly active, newly potent. Through her son's voice, unresolved questions surged back into public consciousness with renewed intensity. This was not closure. It was ignition. But to understand why this confirmation matters so deeply, we have to go back to the shadows that have followed Diana's son since that tragic night. From the moment Diana died, questions refused to stay buried. Official reports were issued, conclusions were drawn. Yet across Britain and far beyond, whispers persisted. Something didn't add up. And as her sons grew older, those whispers began attaching themselves to them. For years, the palace tried to outrun the rumors. But some stories do not fade, they wait. The tragedy itself was immediate and devastating. But the aftermath was slower, more complicated, almost suffocating in its ambiguity. Investigations delivered structured answers. Timelines were reconstructed. Statements were released with the authority of finality. Yet for many, those answers felt clinical in the face of such emotional loss. Diana was not just a royal figure. She was beloved, fiercely human, almost mythic in her connection to the public. When someone so deeply cherished vanishes under chaotic circumstances, closure is rarely accepted at face value. Doubt lingers in the cracks between official lines. As the years passed, that doubt did not disappear, it matured. Conversations shifted from shock to suspicion. Late-night radio shows dissected inconsistencies. Documentaries revisited details long thought settled. Journalists re-examined moments leading up to her final hours. Each revisit stirred public curiosity anew. The palace responded with composure, emphasizing respect for concluded investigations and urging the nation to move forward. But urging does not erase unease. In fact, restraint sometimes fuels it. Meanwhile, her sons were growing up under a spotlight that refused to dim. Every milestone, school appearances, interviews, military service was filtered through the prism of that tragic night. They were not only heirs to titles, they were heirs to unanswered questions. The emotional burden was subtle yet relentless. Grief had to be navigated privately, but speculation followed them publicly. Imagine carrying personal loss while the world debates its circumstances endlessly. Silence became both shield and prison. Public skepticism about official narratives intensified whenever new fragments surfaced. Even small discrepancies reignited conversation. For many citizens, it was not about conspiracy. It was about discomfort with finality. Diana had challenged the establishment during her life. Some believed it was naive to assume every truth surrounding her death had been comfortably contained. The palace understood this tension intimately, and so it chose discipline over debate. Strategic silence became doctrine. Statements were brief, clarifications rare. The institution relied on time to soften doubt. For a while, it worked. Attention shifted to new scandals, new headlines, new chapters of royal life. Yet the whispers never fully dissolved. They hovered at the edges of public consciousness, waiting for a catalyst. Media speculation evolved alongside the digital age. Online forums amplified theories. Commentators revisited interviews with renewed scrutiny. Subtle remarks made years earlier by those close to Diana were replayed and reinterpreted. What had once been fragmented suspicion began forming cohesive narratives in the public imagination. And with each retelling, her son's silence grew more conspicuous. Protecting family privacy was always presented as the highest priority. The palace insisted that reopening wounds served no one. But there was tension in that approach. Privacy protects dignity. It can also conceal complexity. As Diana's humanitarian legacy continued to inspire loyalty and admiration, public attachment deepened. The more revered she became, the stronger the desire to understand every aspect of her story. In quiet corners of public discourse, one persistent thought lingered: someone inside the family must know more. Not necessarily a grand revelation, but fragments, insights, perspectives, truths too delicate to voice. The idea that silence was voluntary rather than ignorant took root slowly, almost imperceptibly. And while the world speculated, one son carried a truth that would take decades to speak aloud. He was just a boy when he walked behind his mother's coffin. The world saw grief. But what it didn't see was the seed of quiet conflict planted that day. Loyalty to the crown. Loyalty to family. Loyalty to memory. For years he remained silent. But silence, when stretched too long, begins to fracture. And eventually, something inside him demanded release. Growing up inside the monarchy means understanding one rule above all others: the institution must survive. Feelings are secondary. Doubts are private. Questions are carefully weighed against consequence. As he matured, that lesson shaped him. Publicly, he honored tradition. He defended the framework that had raised him. He spoke of unity, of continuity, of respect for established findings. Yet privately, an undercurrent of tension pulsed beneath that composure. There were moments subtle, fleeting when his tone sharpened, when his gaze lingered just a fraction longer than expected. It was not rebellion. It was restraint straining under pressure. Senior figures around him emphasized stability at every turn. The monarchy, they reminded him, does not thrive on reopened wounds. It thrives on forward motion. Re-examining the past could destabilize carefully rebuilt trust. It could fracture relationships already delicate from decades of scrutiny. The message was rarely explicit, but it was unmistakable. Protect the crown first. Personal conviction must be filtered through institutional responsibility. And for years he complied, because duty had been woven into him from childhood. But conviction has a way of evolving with age. As he gained independence, as he stepped into his own public identity, private doubts grew sharper. Interviews replayed in his mind. Discrepancies that once seemed minor began to feel heavier. He read accounts, revisited timelines, questioned assumptions he had once accepted. Not recklessly, not impulsively. Carefully, thoughtfully. The more he examined, the more the silence began to feel less like protection and more like suppression. Certain conversations reportedly deepened that shift. Trusted confidants asked pointed questions. Advisors presented perspectives not framed by palace caution. Even private reflections, shaped by fatherhood and maturity, reframed his understanding of legacy. What does it mean to protect your mother's memory? Is it preserving quiet, or is it confronting unresolved truths? The question lingered, unanswered, yet persistent. The emotional cost of withholding what he believed to be true accumulated gradually. It showed in subtle ways: a tightening in interviews, a careful avoidance of specific topics, a visible struggle when his mother's name resurfaced in public discourse. Grief never fully fades, it transforms. And in his case, it transformed into a determination that clarity, however disruptive, might ultimately serve more than silence ever could. The turning point did not arrive in a burst of anger. It arrived in resolve. A quiet, steady decision formed over time. Enough was enough. If truth carried consequences, so be it. If confirmation unsettled comfort, then perhaps comfort had been too fragile all along. Diana had lived boldly, often challenging structures that constrained her. Her influence lingered not only in public memory, but in the moral compass of her son. He could feel it: her insistence on authenticity, her refusal to accept convenient narratives. As the moment of public confirmation approached, tension intensified. He understood the magnitude. This was not merely about revisiting the past. It was about redefining his role within a system built on discretion. He weighed loyalty against integrity, stability against honesty, and ultimately he chose expression over endurance. But when the moment finally came, it wasn't just a personal confession, it was a direct challenge to decades of silence. Inside palace walls, reactions were immediate and divided. Some saw betrayal, others saw inevitability. Emergency meetings were convened, statements drafted and redrafted. Because what Diana's son confirmed didn't just reopen old wounds, it threatened the carefully balanced narrative that had held the monarchy together for years. Within hours of the confirmation, senior royal advisors gathered behind closed doors, their composure sharpened by urgency. These were individuals trained to anticipate crisis, to contain turbulence before it spread. Yet this moment felt different. The revelation had not come from a hostile source or an investigative journalist, it had come from within the bloodline. That distinction stripped away the usual defensive playbook. You cannot easily dismiss your own. And so the discussions turned intense. How to respond without escalating? How to acknowledge without validating every interpretation? The stakes were enormous. At the heart of the tension lay a fundamental dilemma: preserve unity or confront truth. For decades, stability had depended on controlled narratives. The monarchy had survived by projecting continuity, by refusing to let internal fractures become public spectacle. Now that discipline was being tested from within. Some advisors argued for firm rebuttal, a reaffirmation of established conclusions. Others urged restraint, fearing that outright contradiction would deepen suspicion. The divide was not ideological, it was strategic. Both sides understood the fragility of perception. Generational lines within the household became more pronounced. Older figures, shaped by eras where discretion equaled survival, viewed the confirmation as dangerously destabilizing. Younger voices, more attuned to modern expectations of transparency, saw inevitability in what had occurred. The institution stood at a crossroads between tradition and adaptation. And in those tense conversations, it became clear that the real conflict was not simply about the past, it was about how the monarchy would function in a world that demands openness. Public statements from palace representatives reflected careful distancing. Words were chosen with microscopic precision. Emphasis was placed on respect, on unity, on shared grief. Yet there was a subtle undertone and effort to separate institutional stance from personal perspective. It was diplomacy at its most delicate, a tightrope walk between acknowledgement and containment. Observers dissected every syllable, searching for cracks. The king's reported response added another layer of complexity. Measured, composed, yet unmistakably strained. He understood the weight of the confirmation not only as sovereign, but as father. To challenge decades of silence was to challenge decisions made under his reign and before it. His restraint signaled authority, but insiders suggested the emotional impact was profound. Leadership requires calm, even when internal storms rage. And this storm was deeply personal. Outside the palace, perception began shaping its own narrative. Commentators speculated about fractures within the royal household. Was this a family divided? Was succession politics now entangled with unresolved history? The mere suggestion of discord carries consequences. The monarchy relies not on force, but on confidence. And confidence, once shaken, can ripple far beyond one revelation. Above all, there was a quiet fear that moral authority, the invisible currency of the crown, could erode. If the public began believing that truth had been managed rather than confronted, trust could weaken. And without trust, ceremony loses its power. Advisors knew this. The institution's survival depends not merely on heritage, but on credibility. Yet beneath the strategy sessions and carefully drafted responses, one realization began taking shape: this confirmation might not be contained. It might redefine the conversation around succession, around transparency, around what the next generation of royals represents. The future king cannot inherit an institution perceived as evasive, and that possibility hung heavily in every emergency meeting. Yet beyond palace politics, the public reaction was far more emotional and far less forgiving. For millions, Diana was never just a princess. She was a symbol, a rebellion in silk, a heart in a system built on restraint. So when her son confirmed what they had believed for years, it felt like validation, vindication. The people had not imagined it. And suddenly, the memory of Diana surged back into the national bloodstream. The reaction was immediate and deeply emotional. Across Britain, conversations erupted not in whispers, but in declarations. Radio programs filled with callers whose voices trembled with remembered grief. Comment sections overflowed with messages that blended sorrow and fierce loyalty. In the Commonwealth, tributes resurfaced almost instinctively, old interviews replayed, photographs shared, speeches quoted as if they had just been delivered yesterday. It was as though time had folded in on itself, bringing the late princess back into public consciousness with renewed intensity. Social media amplified the surge into a cultural wave. Hashtags demanding transparency trended globally within hours. Users dissected the confirmation, linking it to long-debated questions and calling for deeper clarity. What had once been fragmented suspicion became unified demand. Younger audiences, raised in an era of digital accountability, framed the moment as a turning point. For them, silence was no longer dignified, it was suspicious. They aligned strongly with Diana's son, seeing in his words a challenge to outdated restraint. With that alignment came renewed scrutiny of historic royal decisions. Commentators revisited interviews from decades past, analyzing tone and subtext with fresh urgency. Documentary clips resurfaced, once considered settled history but now re-examined under a different lens. The public was not merely consuming the revelation, they were interrogating it. Each archive statement, each past defense of the official narrative, was measured against the newly spoken truth. The monarchy's past choices felt suddenly present again. Public gatherings emerged organically. Not protests in the traditional sense, but symbolic acts of remembrance. Flowers left at gates. Candles lit in quiet solidarity. Speeches delivered by those who had once felt dismissed for questioning official accounts. Emotional interviews aired from individuals who described years of being labeled conspiratorial, only to now feel affirmed. For them, this confirmation was not scandal, it was justice delayed. The generational divide sharpened visibly. Older supporters of the monarchy urged caution, emphasizing unity and stability. Younger voices countered with calls for openness and reform. Loyalty itself became layered: loyalty to the institution versus loyalty to Diana's memory. The monarchy faced an unexpected dilemma. It was possible to defend the crown and still believe that something had been mishandled in the past. That complexity unsettled traditional narratives of allegiance. Through it all, pressure mounted for further revelations. If one truth could emerge after decades, what else might surface? Commentators speculated that this was only the first crack in a long-sealed chamber. Advocates called for independent reviews. Public trust paradoxically felt both shaken and energized. The confirmation had not collapsed confidence entirely, it had reignited engagement. People were paying attention again, intensely. Yet beneath the emotional surge lay a quieter realization. This was not only about revisiting history, it was about redefining how the monarchy interacts with its own past. Could it evolve toward transparency without destabilizing itself? Could it honor Diana's legacy without unraveling institutional cohesion? Those questions lingered in the charged atmosphere. But this was never only about the past, it was about what happens next. Two brothers. One legacy. One truth finally spoken. But not necessarily agreed upon. As Diana's son stepped into the storm, the question loomed: where did his brother stand? Supportive, silent, or quietly opposed? In a family where unity is currency, even hesitation can speak volumes. Behind closed doors, conversations between them were inevitable. Not confrontational in volume, but heavy in consequence. They had shared the same grief, walked the same path behind their mother's coffin, endured the same relentless glare of public mourning. Yet adulthood had shaped them differently. One carried the responsibility of future kingship, trained to protect the institution at all costs. The other carried the urgency of personal conviction, convinced that silence had reached its limit. When the confirmation was spoken aloud, it did not just ripple outward, it reverberated between them. Their private exchanges were reportedly measured but intense. Not arguments in the dramatic sense, but philosophical divides laid bare. One brother believed that confronting the past openly was necessary for healing and authenticity. The other understood that destabilizing the monarchy could carry consequences far beyond personal satisfaction. Both loved their mother. Both believed they were honoring her. Yet their definitions of loyalty had begun to diverge. That divergence was not born of hostility, but of duty colliding with conscience. The weight of being the future king complicates every decision. A sovereign in waiting cannot speak as freely as a private citizen. Words carry constitutional gravity. Every public stance must be filtered through layers of responsibility. The brother destined for the throne faced a dilemma sharper than any public headline: how to acknowledge emotional truth without eroding institutional stability. Silence could appear complicit. Agreement could appear reckless. Even neutrality risked interpretation. In this high-stakes balance, hesitation became a statement in itself. Media speculation did not help. Headlines quickly framed the situation as a widening rift. Analysts dissected their separate appearances, noting tone, phrasing, even the absence of joint statements. Commentary fueled narratives of division, whether grounded or exaggerated. In reality, the strain was more complex than simple rivalry. It was the strain of two men bound by blood yet burdened by different roles within a centuries-old system. Public curiosity intensified the pressure, turning private tension into public theater. Emotionally, the situation demanded resilience. Protecting their mother's memory meant different things to each of them. For one, it meant transparency and affirmation. For the other, it meant safeguarding the institution she had both challenged and belonged to. Catherine's presence quietly steadied the atmosphere. As mediator and confidante, she understood the stakes. Her influence was subtle but significant, encouraging dialogue, tempering emotion, reminding both men that family fracture would serve no one. The psychological toll of scrutiny cannot be underestimated. Every expression scrutinized, every pause interpreted. For two brothers already shaped by extraordinary public lives, this moment amplified vulnerability. They were no longer simply navigating grief, they were navigating legacy under the harshest light imaginable. And legacy, when contested, can either fracture bonds or forge deeper understanding. Yet beneath the tension lay a sobering realization. The conversation between them was not temporary. It signaled a broader shift in how the monarchy would confront its past. Their differing approaches foreshadowed the direction the institution might take under future leadership. Would reform be embraced or resisted? Would openness redefine tradition? These were no longer abstract debates, they were personal. And as tensions simmered within the family, the broader implications began to crystallize. The British monarchy has survived abdications, wars, scandals, and revolutions. But this moment feels different. Because this time, the challenge isn't coming from the outside, it's coming from within. When a royal confirms what the public has long suspected, the institution must decide: adapt or fracture. The constitutional ripple effects were immediate, even if they were not loudly declared. Reopened narratives have a way of unsettling carefully sealed agreements. Legal frameworks may remain intact, but moral authority is far more fragile. Advisors quietly revisited protocols designed to shield the sovereign from political turbulence. Questions surfaced about precedent. If one member of the royal family can publicly challenge decades of silence, what does that mean for collective responsibility? The monarchy is not merely ceremonial, it rests on shared discipline. And that discipline was now being tested from the inside. Behind closed doors, debates intensified. Some counselors argued that transparency could strengthen credibility in a modern era that values openness. Others warned that exposing internal disagreement risks unraveling cohesion that has taken generations to maintain. Tradition insists on unity. Modernity demands accountability. The tension between those principles sharpened with every public discussion. The crown had long thrived on discretion. But discretion, when misinterpreted, can resemble concealment. The institution faced a profound choice: remain guarded and risk alienation, or evolve and risk vulnerability. Beyond Britain's borders, Commonwealth leaders observed carefully. For nations already re-evaluating their constitutional ties, this moment added complexity. Stability within the monarchy signals reliability abroad. Uncertainty invites reconsideration. Diplomatic channels hummed with quiet inquiries, not accusatory but cautious. They wanted reassurance that the symbolic head of state remained steady. The monarchy understood that global perception is as consequential as domestic trust. At home, anti-monarchy movements gained renewed energy. Critics framed the confirmation as evidence that the institution prioritizes image over truth. Petitions circulated. Public forums filled with debates about relevance and reform. The crown has always endured dissent, but dissent fueled by insider confirmation carries different weight. It feels less like rebellion and more like reckoning. The pressure to respond meaningfully intensified. Calls for independent inquiries resurfaced with urgency. Commentators argued that if new information has emerged, formal review must follow. The monarchy, cautious by design, found itself confronting a reality it had long postponed. Silence was no longer sustainable. In an age of relentless scrutiny, unanswered questions metastasize. The institution could not simply wait for attention to fade. Attention was now sharper, more persistent. Amid this, William's position became even more delicate. As future king, he had to embody stability while acknowledging the emotional truth that had just reshaped public discourse. His statements were carefully calibrated, expressing empathy without undermining the crown's foundation. It was a balancing act of extraordinary precision. Lean too far toward tradition, and risk alienating a generation seeking honesty. Lean too far toward exposure, and risk destabilizing the very institution he is destined to lead. In his restraint, observers glimpsed the blueprint of a future reign defined by cautious evolution. The realization settled heavily across the royal household: the monarchy must evolve to survive. Not through dramatic overhaul, but through measured adaptation. The public no longer accepts rigid silence as virtue. Engagement, however controlled, has become necessary. This moment forced introspection at the highest levels. What kind of institution does the next era demand? One that protects its past unquestioningly, or one that confronts it with maturity? And yet, amid the political tension, something more personal emerged: closure. For years, Diana's story felt unfinished. A life cut short, questions left hanging, a narrative controlled by others. But now, through her son's voice, a new chapter has been written. Not one of conspiracy, but of acknowledgement. Not of silence, but of courage. And in that courage, her legacy feels more alive than ever. When he spoke, it was not simply an act of defiance or revelation. It was an act of reclamation. Speaking truth in her name carried enormous emotional symbolism. Diana had often been portrayed through filtered lenses, either sainted beyond complexity or scrutinized beyond fairness. Rarely was she allowed full ownership of her own narrative. By confirming what so many had suspected, her son shifted that balance. He was not rewriting history recklessly. He was insisting that history breathe again, unguarded and unpolished. That insistence carried weight far beyond the words themselves. The public began reframing Diana's place in royal history almost instantly. She was no longer only the tragic princess, frozen in memory at the height of vulnerability. She became once more a catalyst. A figure whose life, and now whose truth, forced the institution to examine itself. Documentaries re-emerged, not as speculative thrillers but as emotional retrospectives. Commentators spoke of her courage, her defiance, her humanity. The narrative expanded. Diana was not simply remembered, she was reinterpreted through a lens of validation. For her son, the moment marked a reclamation of narrative power. For decades, he had existed as a supporting character in a story written largely by others. Analysts dissected his silence. Critics judged his restraint. But in choosing to speak, he altered that dynamic. He stepped from reaction into authorship. That shift was profound. It suggested that the next generation of royals might not be content with inherited scripts. They might demand agency even when agency carries risk. This evolution hinted at something larger, a generational shift from secrecy to transparency. The monarchy had long relied on discretion as armor, but armor, when worn too rigidly, can isolate. By breaking the silence, Diana's son demonstrated a different approach, one that values emotional honesty alongside institutional stability. It does not dismantle tradition, it rebalances it. And that recalibration may define the era to come. There is also a human cost woven through this transformation. Royal restraint protects the crown, but it often suppresses personal truth. The confirmation exposed that cost. Years of internal conflict, years of measured words, years of balancing grief against expectation. In acknowledging what many believed, he also acknowledged the burden of silence itself. That vulnerability resonated deeply. It reminded the public that beneath titles and protocols are individuals shaped by loss and conviction. The monarchy, in turn, found itself reconnecting with public emotion in a way it had not anticipated. Sympathy, empathy, renewed dialogue, these currents flowed stronger than condemnation alone. The institution's survival has always depended on its ability to mirror the nation's mood. In this moment, acknowledging complexity rather than suppressing it seemed to restore a fragile bridge between palace and people. Diana's influence, undeniable and enduring, remained at the center of it all. Her compassion, her instinct to challenge, her refusal to conform quietly. Those qualities lived on in her sons, expressed differently but rooted in the same moral foundation. Through them, her voice persisted not as nostalgia, but as principle. The confirmation did not close her story, it amplified it. And in that amplification, there was a sense that history itself had pivoted. The monarchy stood altered, not broken, not overthrown, but reshaped by honesty. What began as whispers had evolved into acknowledgement. What lingered as doubt had transformed into dialogue. The future of the crown would now unfold in a landscape less defined by silence and more defined by measured transparency. Because in the end, this was never just about a confirmation. It was about confronting the past to reshape the future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.